is.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so welcome, Pasha Marlowe. We are live, and I am so happy to have you in here. I have so much fun when I talk to you, and it's also just so informative. I love the fact that you are so real. You're so open and transparent about all of it. There may be some subjects that are off limits to you, but I haven't found them yet.
I haven't. I really haven't. I'm scared. If when I find it, I'll be scared.
But I think that it helps because there's, on social media, there could be this whole thing of just pretending that everything's fine. And in life, there can be this whole thing of pretending everything's fine. And as women, there can be this whole thing of pretending everything's fine. And you are really clear, everything's not fine, and you can still have fun.
Yes, which is new, which is excellent news because I wasn't born this way, I wasn't raised this way, and it could be learned and unlearned. So I find that really relieving because if I were watching me 2 years ago, I would have rolled my eyes and probably turned it off and said, look, I've had a lifetime of trauma and I'm in the middle of my deepest grief right now. So don't tell me I can have fun and laugh. Thank you very much. That's, wouldn't feel appropriate, or it would even not feel perhaps sophisticated enough. And so those were the limiting beliefs I had about it. And now I see it as a form of awareness and enlightenment and relief that I just didn't have before. So for me, it was life-saving.
So take us back to you 2 years ago, right? Because we're talking about if you saw us having this conversation 2 years ago,
it
would have been just like, yeah, whatever. You obviously don't know what it is to be me, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think I, like many of us watching, grew up with a lot of trauma. It felt like there wasn't a year that didn't have some form of trauma or crises or major surgery involved. And I was 49 and I was thinking, like, I have not had a break. My nervous system's fried. I have like cumulative traumas and PTSD and so many triggers. It's almost embarrassing to talk about them. I listed them to my husband this morning. He's like rolling his eyes. How can I possibly keep track of all your triggers? I'm like, you should know the big ones, because seriously. And so I feel like high maintenance sometimes, and I have shame about that. So I felt like joy wasn't in the cards for me. And I felt like there was a dark cloud over me, like I was being sucked into this, pit and clawing myself out and then falling back in and clawing myself out and falling back in, which looked like depression and anxiety and PTSD almost every day. And then, ironically, my biggest fear came true. My biggest fear has always been that I would lose one of my children or that one of my children would become very ill. And it's like, I don't think I could survive that. I couldn't imagine living through it. And it's interesting what the universe brings. I'm not saying I manifested it because that just is hard for me to wrap my head around, but interesting that the universe would bring me my greatest fear of my little one going from feeling jolly and silly and active and strong one day to not being able to walk the next, which is a combination, for those that are watching, like, oh my gosh, what does he have? Because I always ask, is a combination of Lyme disease and co-infections on top of vaccine injury that just was like the perfect storm. And this is not to say that all Lyme looks like this or that all vaccine injuries look like this, but for my son, that triple storm really knocked him down. And so much so that he was home for 2 years, didn't go to school, needed help walking stairs, needed help toileting, and was in so much constant chronic pain. Right. We were in and out of doctor's offices every day, hospitals, travel, the whole thing. That, of course, he became also depressed. And this isn't the life. I don't want to live this life. I don't want to live in pain all the time. So we talked about suicide often. Right. And that's heartbreaking, obviously, for anybody of any age with any child. And he was 11. And I just was like, I can't even imagine surviving that. So it was basically holding space for him and realizing that I needed to figure out a way for me, if I even wanted to, and my choice was to want to survive that, that I needed to find a way to keep our vibrations high and to keep any sense of strength or security or safety or levity in this dark situation. And so I started researching, dorking out on how people survive tragedies. And I believe one of these conversations was actually with you, and how we survive traumas.
Mhm.
And one of the other places I went to is Viktor Frankl, A Man's Search for Meaning, and he wrote about how people survived the Holocaust. And one of the many, many beautiful passages in the book was about how the people who survived because they found humor in community, how they were able to still laugh with each other. And it
Right.
just hit me at the perfect moment, at the perfect day, on the perfect time. And I said, I have not tried that. And that seems very unusual and hard. Might be the hardest thing. I don't think I've ever had fun. Oh, I forgot to laugh. Wow, I've gone 49 years. I haven't laughed. Nobody ever taught me to laugh. Nobody ever taught me the value of laughing. I've heard laughter is the best medicine, but I don't really believe it. These were all the things that we're saying. And how could you possibly make humor or comedy out of illness or trauma or suicide? And
Right.
and now, flash forward 2 years, you can. And the people going through it want to be heard and to have people hold space for their traumas. And so to be able to speak about your trauma and to tell the story through the lens of humor, even if it's the fact that the timing was so bad it's funny, or that was so hard it's funny, which is a little strange to say, but sometimes it's that, or the irony behind it, it allows the person who's speaking it to say it without as much fear and heaviness, and it allows the person hearing it to receive it with a little bit more relief. There's like a tension that builds up when we
Right.
of these traumas. And so if somebody's speaking about their cancer and they're laughing about it, you could be like, okay, now I could kind of talk to them about it. We could talk to them about losing hair. We could talk to them about chemo. Like if the other person is speaking about their own experience through the lens of humor a little bit, it just eases it for them and us. So,
Right.
So yes. And I found that now that I've worked with people in a various amount of traumas and grief places, I feel like we can almost find it anywhere. I've yet to find a situation where there wasn't some edge or parameter with time, not in, like nothing is funny while we're in it. Nothing is funny about the trauma in the moment. And for some, it happens within minutes or days. And for some, it's years later or on their deathbed that they find humor in it. So there's a time between the tragedy and the comedy. But I find that because I'm orientating myself towards humor more, that I get there faster. Like I go to really hard conversations, not at all funny, not at all laughing at the moment, thinking this someday there's actually going to be some humor in this. And then I find it faster. I go through it faster. So I struggle less. I don't want to say I necessarily grieve less because I'm still grieving all the time, but I struggle less.
Right. It makes perfect sense to me. And I want to say hello. If you're watching, come on in and say hello to us. If you have any questions that come up, then go ahead and pop the questions into the chat as well, because we'll be happy to talk about all of that. For me,
I'm not good at small talk. I'm not good at small talk.
You're doing great. You're doing great. You're doing great. My family, honestly, we used humor all the time. So for me, it was always a strength, and it was something that I brought to mediation, right? So I would be with people who were going to have difficult conversations, and I would be able to use humor to make it easier for them from the get-go. And I think I shared with you, I only had one person that really pushed back about it. And so I can't remember what I said, but something happened. I cracked a joke. Everybody laughed, including him. But as he was laughing, he also said, that's not funny, because he wasn't ready to go there, right? So I apologized.
Yes.
And he still needed to be in that sort of dark space. This isn't funny, right? So it wasn't something where he was ready to shift yet, even though half of him wanted to, because he laughed.
Right. And interesting that he would after realize, no, I wasn't ready for that. That actually didn't feel safe. So it was good that he was able to say that. And people ask me all the time, how did you know when it was okay for your son to bring humor into his illness? How did you know when he was giving consent to that, to be able to start that? And and that's a great question. And I find that, we're like, I test the waters differently for him than I would an adult. But for example, he would wake up and the first thing he'd say is, "I'm in pain," or "Ouch, I hurt." Very first thing he'd say.
Right.
And I would typically hold him and say, "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm eases soon," or "I'm right here," or "Right now you're safe." I would try all things. And then one morning with the orientation of humor, I said, "It sounds really hard. Can you tell me about your pain?" And he said, "It's just relentless. It's so bad. I would do anything to get rid of my pain."
Mhm.
And I caught the anything. I said, "What would you do to get rid of your pain?" And he said, "I don't know. I'd eat eyeballs. I'd eat eyeballs to get rid of my pain." Now he's 12 at the time. I said, "You would eat eyeballs to get rid of your pain?" Now we're still honoring that he's in pain. We're still honoring that, holding space for it, but we're starting to twist and reframe it a little bit. He's like, I said, "What kind of eyeballs would you eat?" And he said, "I would eat horse eyeballs. I'd eat fish eyeballs." He's like, "I'd eat warthog eyeballs." I'm like, "You would eat warthog eyeballs? That's disgusting. How many warthog eyeballs would you eat to feel better?" And he's like, "Favorite number is 21. And then now we're like, is this a 21 warthog eyeball day? Like we say these things to each other now. And I would have never thought to make light or find humor in it or laugh with it or even reframe it. I would have just never known to do that unless I practiced it, learned about it, it became part of my habit. So now that I orientate myself that way, I can retrieve it easier. Not every time, because sometimes I'm just stuck in the grief. But often I find, oh, good, I'm so glad I have this skill now. Like any skill, like gratitude, until we orientate that way and practice it, it's just not in our habit to find gratitude. So it's, to me, it's the same, finding humor.
All right. That makes perfect sense to me. So is he in pain because is it inflammation that's causing the pain? Is that when you're talking about Lyme disease and
yeah, it's kind of systemic. When it becomes chronic, it's systemic. So there's neurological pain, there's muscular pain, joint pain, nerve pain. It's digestive pain. So it's and when I say, "Where are you in pain?" Every 100% time, all over. I can't imagine. The only thing I can relate it to is perhaps when, like, I was just talking about my hot flash. It's like when I have a hot flash and somebody said, "Where do you feel hot?" I'm like, from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet and out to my fingertips and beyond, hot. And so I feel like he feels that way. He like flares up like a.
right.
I'm sure inflammation is involved a lot, but it just flares up and it causes perksing and Lyme. But yeah, it's overwhelming.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have Lyme disease. So it was, for me, I was fortunate in that they caught it within the first 30 days. And for me, I didn't get a bullseye. I presented with pain in my joints. I couldn't handle any kind of cold. It was summertime, but I couldn't handle the air conditioning on. Any kind of cold blowing over me caused aching in my joints. So I went into the doctor. I was like, "Look, I don't know if I've got family history, fibromyalgia, arthritis. I don't know what's going on, but I can't handle this." She said, "Well, let's test you for Lyme."
So that's so lucky you found a doctor who thought that way. Yes.
It was, because it was within the first 30 days. So they were able to do it. And interestingly, when I got tested for Lyme again, years later, I came up negative.
Yeah.
And she said, "Are you sure you have it?" I said, "Yes, I am, because you tested me and you found it and you gave me the antibiotic." So
yeah, the I just read about this, that the antibodies there's a false test later. So if you don't catch it right away, or you don't use a very highly sensitive test, which of course is really ridiculously expensive and out of pocket, you can't catch it or notice it anymore. And sometimes doctors just treat it symptomatically because the tests are not always very accurate, and often misdiagnosed as anything from fibromyalgia to MS to Alzheimer's to schizophrenia. I mean, you can be really misdiagnosed with this disease. So that's unfortunately what happened for us. And so he received treatment later than he needed to.
Yeah. And he was young too. So I mean, probably he manifested symptoms later, and the ticks are so small, right? That actually do it to you. They're so tiny that it's unlikely that you even find it.
Yeah. Most people do not have the bullseye rash, and most people don't see the tick. It's a the size of a pinhead or poppy seed, the ones that have the Lyme disease typically. Like the bigger the tick, the luckier you are. If you find a big fat tick on you and you feel it crawling, awesome. It's probably more like a dog tick or something. Doesn't as often carry the Lyme disease. And you could get it off of you. And then if you have a bullseye rash, you're even luckier. I know that sounds crazy, but like then the doctor's like, oh, that's Lyme. They see it and then they believe it more. Later, you're just like, I've been feeling really tired and achy for the last year. I don't know what it is. And depending on who you are and your family history or what age you are, they're going to say anything from stress to menopause to fibromyalgia to IBS or whatever. And then it's going to continue without treatment. So it's really a mysterious and frustrating and terribly lonely disease because it's not recognized or understood yet.
Right. Mm-hmm. I do think too, comedy's been used. I mean, when you listen to comedians, they often take the darkest parts of their lives,
absolutely,
and make them humorous.
Yes.
And I know for myself, I've done that in the moment. So with the people might not think this is funny, but I'm just going to share. So after the attempted kidnapping, like right after, I had a friend take me to the hospital, and she got into the car to drive me. And once we were alone, I said to her, I thought I was too fucking old and fat for this. And we just started laughing. And, it was like, then I could just be me and say something like that, right? And it was just to break the tension and have it not be as hard as it was, because we were in the middle of hard stuff, right? Yes. And similarly, my husband met me at the hospital, and my parents came too, but my husband came in first. And when he came in, I said, you know what this means? And he's like, no, what does it mean? I said, it means I never have to watch Law and Order again in my entire life. And he started laughing. He's like, what is wrong with you? Like, how can you be saying this in the hospital right after this happened to you? But I was cracking up.
And that's a way that you survived it. And I love that in the paradox of life, we can hold like terror and body shame and humor in the same moment. Like all those thoughts exist at the same moment. I always find it so interesting when people say, and I hear it a lot, you can't hold fear and love in the same moment, or the opposite of fear is love. And I want to understand it. I want to embrace it because it sounds really good. But I'm like, I don't know, because I'm really fearful all the time of my son's illness. And because I love him, I don't know, because I love them, I'm fearful. So like, to me, it's intertwined, like every emotion. I just can't separate them. I'm sure there's a philosophical understanding of that perhaps I just haven't reached, but I just don't separate it.
Right. You can bounce between them really quickly. I mean, because the opposite of love is actually apathy. Because if you're angry with someone, you have some kind of feeling toward them. You have some kind of a connection, right?
Yes.
And so it's really when you just don't care what happens to them ever. Yes. That's the complete opposite of love, because with love, you care in some fashion.
Yes. That's hitting a nerve. I hear you on that. And, when I come to the table in my marriage with many emotions, including anger and rage, I'll say, this is a form of intimacy and love that I'm coming to. I know it sounds like I'm always bitching at you and frustrated. Like, here's another thing that's bothering me. But if I didn't care and love so much, I wouldn't even bother come to the table with these issues. So if you can reframe it as me just caring, that would be great. In return, like, let me know what angers you. Don't just, don't placate me. So apathy and me don't get along. I'm way too fiery.
But that helps, because then people know exactly where you are and how to meet you where you are, right? Even if in the moment they might not be thinking, oh, great, Pasha's coming with more stuff, right?
That was the eye roll. Yeah. I get that eye roll a lot from my husband and my kids, because I make when you've gone through a lot of hard things, you have trauma and you have triggers and you have a deeper understanding of yourself and a fierceness about your healing. Like, it's just hard to have simple conversation. For me, it's hard to have simple conversations. It's hard not to go into the deep dive. It's hard not to want to explore those emotions. Like, I hold that all day long. And so it's it's actually exhausting to put up the armor as if all that is not going on. And I have to recognize that it's exhausting for them to always meet me in my emotions. So that's balance that we haven't found.
Yeah, that is the challenge.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But you bring the passion, and that's good. I mean, so how did you shift, right? Because we talked a little bit about you needed to shift.
Yeah.
You started to hear people that made you say, oh, I want to shift like this. I want to try this.
Mm-hmm.
But then how did you actually do the shift from not using humor as a tool to not only you use it as a tool, but you help other women to use it as a tool?
Right. For me, I started watching comedy shows different than the comedy shows I'd seen before. I started watching like Hannah Gadsby, who's on a Netflix special called Nanette, who uses her rage about patriarchy and homophobia and turns it into comedy. So it becomes a learning opportunity and activism. And I was like, oh, that's awesome, you know, that she could do that through humor and teach people. And then I started watching Tig Notaro, who grieves about the loss of her mother and losing her breast to breast cancer. And she turned it into comedy. And she was talking about how that saved her life because she wanted to die and then she wanted to share. And in sharing and comedy, she made other people laugh. And then all of a sudden she had purpose again. I'm like, yay, that makes sense. So I wrapped my arms around that concept, started trying it on for myself. Really was for the first time having fun and challenging myself, and then like learning to play with myself in the most non-sexual of terms, like at night with insomnia, when many of my PTSD would show up at night. I was usually just terrorized at night, couldn't sleep, and from flashbacks and such. And I would start to play with my mind and play with words, or just reframe some of the words, like even flashback, like how, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but like, how can you reframe what it is as your reality and then twist it a little bit through the lens of humor? And so I would just start thinking about how I could relieve some of this pressure off myself. Then I started trying with my son. It was working really well in the hospitals, especially during really painful procedures or annoying medicines and disgusting tasting things. We started using humor, and I was realizing how he was walking through his fear and grief better. And then I started bringing it into my personal training sessions, which looked initially like yoga and movement and exercise. We started moving through it in menopause and the midlife, you know, body shame issues come up often. How can we approach this through the lens of humor? And people were digging it. It was like a new level of healing that I didn't even see when I was a marriage and family therapist. People were bringing it home to their families and their kids. Now it's like trickling down. And then I just said, I need to, of course, this is the entrepreneur in me. I need to teach this. I need to create a program that combines therapy and comedy and sisterhood, because those are the three things that work now for me. And in combination, I created Roar with Laughter, where women in sisterhood, 6 to 10 women depending, talk about their deepest griefs and shames and fears and rage and all the things, and then we create comedy out of it, and we put on a comedy show at the end of the 8 weeks. And that's not actually, even though that's culminating event, that's not the magic. The magic has actually already started week 1, when they're sharing and they're being held in safe and empathetic space. And then they're starting to see the edges of humor or even pleasure or gifts around these experiences. And they're liberating others with their stories. And then, as you know, it's just like, oh, okay, this has meaning beyond pain. This has fueled me to help others because I've been through this. I can now walk with others so that they don't maybe suffer as much.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. And I think that you illustrate that so beautifully in terms of your son, because he does suffer with chronic pain and chronic illness. So the best that you can do is make his life better, right? So often we're looking for a cure, we're looking for the fix, and it can be, I mean, a lot of things when we're younger, we can get to some kind of a cure or a fix, right? But with PTSD or with chronic Lyme, chronic pain, there are things that we have to live with that don't come with an automatic fixed date, and the fixed date may never come. The fixed date may be that, literally it's rest in peace when we die, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And until then, we have to still make the best of our life through that point. And that's what you're doing, is you're creating your best life very intentionally every single day. Every single day turning to joy. Every single day, right? And you can acknowledge the pain, as we're talking about with your son. There are things that come up that are not nice, right? So you can acknowledge that pain and at the same time find joy. At the same time find humor.
Yes, definitely. And every day I actually start over, just like you're referring to. I wake up with pain and sadness and fear, and then I have to check in with the skills that I've learned. Oh, I breathe, I can meditate, I can practice journaling or gratitude. And can I find pleasure in this moment at all? How can I make this any better? And is there any humor in it? So I go through this, and humor's at the top. Like for me, it's like the lightest, most high vibration thing I can do in those moments. And I try to reframe it as enlightenment, so I don't get myself into the that's shallow, just finding something to laugh about it. I try to, I think of it as enlightenment, lightening up. And that helps me grab it and work for it and fight for it. And then as grief happens and trauma happens, I'll be triggered throughout the day and go into my deep dive of crying on the bathroom floor. And then I get back up. And so I'm more resilient now because of it. I'm probably not that much fun to live with all the time.
I don't think any of us are, right? I mean, you find the right person and you're fun enough, but we all have our quirks. We all have our stuff.
Yeah, I'm kind of fierce and fiery about it, and I don't, as we mentioned, I don't handle small talk well. I don't handle apathy well, and it really, frankly, frustrates me if people aren't working on their healing and complaining about where they are in life. It really just frustrates me. I kind of am been known to say, well, then do something about it. But I say it nicer when I'm coaching.
I am with you on that, though. Because I want people to move forward, right? And there are people who get stuck in victimhood. That is who they are. They want to be the victim. They want to have the sympathy. They want to have that, and you can watch them self-sabotage. You watch them. You pull them out of the hole, and you watch them dig that hole again for themselves.
Right. And that brings up a beautiful question, which is one of the hardest questions. How is this illness or victimhood or whatever it is serving you?
Right.
You're right. And then so when people said, how is your son's illness serving you? I'm like, I got so mad. I'm like, don't ask me. It's not there's no gift in it. It's not serving me at all. And and what part do I play in it? And how do I contribute to it? I was like, ow. Then after being pissed off, I sat with it and I realized, interesting, if he's ill, my husband and I have to actually work together as a team more. Even though we have marital issues, we're actually together and better when Jamie is sick. And I think he knows that. And I think we know that. So that's what we're working on, the hard work that we're doing as a family of knowing that part of his illness has a dynamic of him not thinking that we'll be okay without him or together without him. And so we had a date last night for the first time in the 2 years, the first time we've been away from him. And he said to me this morning, he said, I bet you just sat around just worried about me and thinking about me and not having any fun. And thank goodness I lied and said, we had so much fun. We went out, we walked around town, we stayed up late. He was like, really? I'm like, yeah, it was great. Because I think that he needed to hear that, he needed to hear that he's not the glue, right?
Right.
You need to take that on.
Right. That he doesn't have to stay sick in order to keep his parents together, right? Or to have things be better between his parents.
Exactly. So we have to work on our stuff, clearly.
Yeah.
So yeah. And there's always work to do.
Right. It is a hard one. And you can see it better in others than you see it in
Oh,
yourself, right? So it's very easy, not very easy, but it can be very easy to look at someone and be like, oh yeah, I see how this serves them. Sometimes you don't see it. Sometimes it just irritates you. But sometimes you can see the bigger picture. This is serving them in some way, right? They need this.
yeah, and maybe I'm going into too dark of a place, but I talk to women who have experienced sexual trauma in the past, and then they talk about how they're stuck in this cycle of body shame or weight gain or not feeling fit and being fatigued.
Mhm.
And then when you dig under it, it's like to protect them from
Right.
not being approached or desired or in a position where they'd end up having unwanted sex and being vulnerable again. And I know that's
Right.
really hard to hear, and yet I think there's truths in all of these things. Like, why am I still sick? Why am I still holding on to inflammation? Why am I still holding on to this anger? And then looking into, how's this serving me?
Right.
And what are the few benefits I receive from it? Is it easier to isolate, and that's why I have social anxiety? I don't know. Like, I'm just thinking of all the things that we all do.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a perfect example because it is true. I mean, people who have been sexually assaulted, if they were sexually assaulted as children
Yes.
or as adults and they felt like they couldn't fight back, there is that tendency to, you can gain weight so that then you can protect against anybody being interested. You can hypersexualize so you're the person in control of it,
Exactly.
right? So that you're the one calling all the shots. So it's not them, it's you. I mean, there are different things, and when you don't do it on a conscious level, right? Your brain is doing this on a subconscious level. You're not participating.
Right. For safety.
And right. And so it's only when you do that deep dive into, well, why am I doing this? Because the reality is our brain is looking to keep us alive, right? Our subconscious brain is doing all that it can to keep us alive. And so PTSD is just one of those things. Our brains tipped into hypervigilance to keep us alive,
Yes.
right? It is there for a very important purpose. It is making sure that we survive and that our offspring survive, right?
Yes.
So when you look at it from that perspective, then you see what the purpose is. Then you can start to do, okay, well, I want to change that. How am I going to change that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's such a brave and scary place to go. And I don't know if that's what shadow work is referred to. I know there's different terms, but I do know that it's some of the hardest questions that I ask my clients, and then I get really upset when my therapist asks me. So I know they're good questions because they scare me. I'm like, oh,
right.
You touched a nerve. There must be some truth to that, or something I need to learn from that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me too. Weight gain was a thing for me in terms that I didn't know. I had a problem losing weight. I couldn't get myself to lose weight. And it was hypnotherapy. It came out afterwards. I was afraid because I gained weight after I had been thrown in the river as a 10-year-old in retaliation for work that my dad had done as an auxiliary cop. And it was a group of 3 older kids, and it was an older girl that threw me in the river. And so that was my body's way of protecting me. Like, there was this idea in my head that if I was big, it wouldn't have happened, right? And so it was a way to make me bigger so that I wouldn't be seen as a victim, basically.
Yeah.
I would be seen as a potential target.
Yeah.
And so it was similar.
Yeah.
So with physical attack too, it doesn't have to be sexual, but it is.
No, not at all. And it's so interesting. We're in a lot of my work and just working with women. The idea of weight comes up a lot. And I was just saying yesterday that even though I'm a personal trainer too, I don't want to talk or embrace the idea of like weight loss anymore, because I feel like we lose so much in our lives already. Like, I don't want to take it from the perspective of losing anymore. And I want to expand. Like, I want to be more visible. I want to be more expansive and find a new way of reframing wellness and health. And so, so I just don't want anyone to misinterpret my comments as like gaining weight means you're not desirable, because I don't mean that. And so I just want to put that out there, because I think that that's the perception. And I think we put that on ourselves as women. But that's also our culture. And so we have to kind of question, oh, is that what I was taught? And that's what I think. And now all of a sudden, that's what I think is to be true.
Right.
Yeah. So I just challenge everything. I challenge the constructs of marriage. I challenge the constructs of education. And I just thinking, who made this rule? Wait a minute. Who set this rule? And then I think, what is it in alignment with me and my own beliefs? And I'm not the only one who's right, but for me, this doesn't make any sense anymore. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a nice segue. I want to say a little more about weight, but I'm going to leave it because I think it's a nice segue into your book.
Oh yeah, wasn't that smooth?
That was really smooth. So let's talk about your book. My Next Husband Will Be a Lesbian.
It feels unrelated to some, but to me, it's all about truth telling and doing the deep dive into all that you are, being your grief, being your desire, all of it. So when I, interestingly, faced the fear of Jamie's illness and like death, because we were talking about suicide, I was fearing his death. And then I was feeling deep grief. And I got angry too. I started getting angry about patriarchy. I started getting angry about injustices in my past with my parents, or my husbands. And then all of a sudden, also paradoxically, I became really in touch with what brought me joy and desire. And Glennon Doyle's Untamed didn't help me any. No, it helped a lot. It was in the beginning of the pandemic, and I had time to read the dang book. And she really opened up my eyes and several people's eyes to the fact that you can be you could be bisexual, you could be married to a man, you can stay married to a man and still identify as bisexual. You could have never an experience with a woman if you identify as bisexual and still call yourself bisexual and all. And then I went on from there to thinking, well, why did I think I needed to get married to a man in the first place? And where did I learn that? And who said that was the only way? And so I ended up talking to women about expansiveness and all along the LGBTQIA plus community, and but mostly initially women who were married to men and exploring and expanding in their minds or in reality. And so I wrote the book, My Next Husband Will Be a Lesbian, which some people really hate the title and some people laugh right away because they resonate with it. I can't please everybody, but the intention behind the title is confusion and the paradox of I am married, second marriage to a man, and there's a part of me that feels like an unlived, unseen, unknown part that may or may not ever be revealed or experienced. Mm-hmm. And I realized that holding in of that secret was like death by paper cuts. It was like killing me to hold on to this shame and secret. And some people hold on to secrets about past events, and some people hold on to secrets about their identity. And I see how it causes so much harm and things like inflammation and body pain and anger. And I was realizing that about myself. And so I wrote the book in correlation or combination. It's not the word I'm thinking of. It's a book compilation. It's a compilation book with 15 other women who also identify within the LGBTQIA plus community, along from their first coming out story to having had a lifetime of experience. So it's a really great book about just reclaiming your desire and speaking your truth. And that the world does not have to fall apart, and that even your relationships don't have to fall apart. Your marriages don't have to fall apart. And sometimes they do. And that's okay too, if it comes from a place of truth. And we lose people in different ways throughout our life. I haven't spoken to my parents since this book was released. I really haven't had any contact with them, nor my husband's family. And I know that there's a lot of underlying homophobia, perhaps, in that decision on their end. And I just have to stand really strong and proud of myself for speaking my truth. If I lose people, then I'm still in a place that's healthier for me. So the people who I needed to most accept me, my husband, my children, my best of friends, they have been lovely. And that's enough.
Yeah. And it's also hard, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard.
It is in that space of it's a both and, right? That there are people that you want to have there for you.
Yes.
and they may not have the capacity to do it.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do
Right.
what you need to do that is best for you.
Yeah, so many people wait to write their books until their parents die or their abusers die or their
Right.
spouse dies, and then they die and they
Right.
don't write the book. You know what I mean?
Right.
Not the book is the end, but it's like, who knows me and sees me? Who out there actually knows me? You know, all of me. And it's a sense of like, now it's like, it's tangible. Even, I don't even think my husband's read the book. Like it's like I wrote it. It's out there. It's outside of my throat now, which it was stuck in for 50 years. And
Right.
so yeah, it's liberating and free. And since then I've slept better. Strangely enough, I've released some inflammation that I was probably holding on to about that secret. And I'm hearing from a lot of the women who contributed to the book that that it was like the scariest and most freeing thing they did. And some of them are anonymous, and it still was freeing. Like they didn't use their names in the book. Still, it was the process of writing it and sending it, pushing send, yes. And then having it like on paper forever. That's powerful.
Yes, very cathartic. I will say, I thought your title was very funny. And you and I have already talked about this, because when I heard my next husband will be a lesbian, I resonated just because of the power of the patriarchy. Yeah. So I always thought I would make a better husband than a wife, right? I mean, you just, like, the roles are different.
Right.
So I don't necessarily do all the things I'm, supposed to do as a traditional female.
Right.
And it's completely impossible to do all those things anyway. But, the way that we grew up in terms of, if you had a mom who was doing like the traditional role, right? Mm-hmm. Oh my God, was it a lot of work? And it never ended, right? Mm-hmm. So, my grandparents, I'm looking, and my grandmothers are still doing all the work, right? My grandfathers get to lounge around and relax because they've retired. Time is over. And I just was really clear.
Yeah,
that's I'm not learning how to cook, because that's a trap. It just
you're not eating animal or you're not a cook. Yes.
No, and I didn't. I did not learn how to cook until I broke up with my ex-husband the first time we were together, and I was like, oh crap, I guess this means I'm going to have to learn how to cook my own food. Right. So at that point I did, but it was in my 30s. I mean, I really was just like, no, I do not want that trap. I do not want it to be that I'm responsible for all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the emotional toll of womanhood.
Yes. Yes. Yeah,
but that's a weight that I can get around. The weight of the world, the weight we carry. That weight I talk about.
Yeah, but you were very literal with it. I mean,
yes, exactly. That's what I think was interesting, that it released off of my shoulders, metaphorically, and off of some of my menopausal body, actually. Yes.
So what do you think was the thing? Because I mean, you're not the only woman to have this arise, right? Where you recognize later in life, wait a second.
Yeah. Definitely not the only one. No, there's no, it's quite common, actually. I mean, there's actually, well, now I'm just part of the community. I mean, there's everything from late in life lesbian groups to women and to polyamory. I mean, there's this broad scope of options, other than hold it in, endure sex knowing that you have more inside of you and only have a fantasy life that you can feel shame about. That's not the only answer, right? Thank goodness.
Yeah, not even close to the only answer.
No. And so I do, a lot of my coaching is actually with women who, like, most of them are still in heteronormative relationships, but just are expansive. Again, I'm still loyal and married to my husband and plan to be for some time. It's an identity, not a behavior, right? And we don't have experience to identify, but it just feels good to identify. Now, there's also the dynamic of not feeling like queer enough to be part of the community. So if I go to a pride parade, I look pretty darn straight, especially if I were to bring my husband and kid. I don't even look like I fit in the community, and I will feel that way. And I don't feel straight enough to go to like the neighborhood barbecues sometimes. And I mean, it's a weird dynamic, and I think that's especially true for the bisexual community. That kind of like bi invisibility is something to navigate and support each other on.
Right. I do think that it ends up, it's strange, right? So it starts off, it was a hard road in terms of coming out as gay or lesbian. And I think it's still hard, but it's not as hard as it used to be.
Right.
And now it's a hard road coming out as bisexual. Like, people don't get it. I think people that like black and white have a really hard time with the gray and the fluidity of the sexuality.
Yeah. And I think it's 60% of it's either 60% or 2/3. It's pretty similar, but of the LGBTQ community is the B. But they're also the least celebrated, recognized.
Right.
Yeah. And I think there's probably far more people that are in that spectrum that just haven't even sat with themselves enough to recognize it in themselves, or sat with somebody they trust enough to say it out loud and to start just exploring or expressing it. So that's where I love to hold space for the women who are in that place of, wait a minute, I hadn't even thought about that, but now you say it, it kind of makes sense. And they start to go back to like, well, actually, Netflix knows I'm gay. Like, Netflix knows, right? Like, what do you read? What do you watch? What do you think? I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. And it's just funny. It's just so funny when that like boing comes with light bulb moment. It's great. It's great.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So you and I had a conversation about boundaries too, right? And I wanted to make sure we talked a bit about that, because we haven't talked about it here. But because you were talking too about, you haven't had a conversation with your parents or your parents-in-law since the book came out. So I'm thinking that also lends into a boundaries conversation, but maybe not.
No, it does. Yeah, for sure. Next weekend is our first reunion with my husband's extended family, who is Catholic. And I haven't heard from them, haven't received any support, which is different from how we were interacting before. They haven't come out with anything negative or mean-spirited at all, or homophobic even in statement, but I'm going into it a little nervous to walk into the space that might not be accepting. And I'm prepared for them to say, I don't agree with your choice, or I don't agree with your identity, but I still love you, or something like that. Like, that might be what they say. And I'm preparing myself to have something to say in response. Like, if you don't agree with my identity, that's not love, or something like that.
But you're going to say something big.
Oh, yeah, I can't not. I'm such a pain in the ass. I'm sorry. I'm really not fun at a party either. I don't, because it'll just continue. And I really feel that somebody else in that room, of the 20 or 30 people who are there, be it child or adult, somebody else in that room is needing somebody to step up and change the narrative about this. Because I don't believe that nobody else in that room is exploring their sexuality in any way. I just can't believe it. And so I'm doing it for the youth in the room who may or may not someday need somebody to hold that space. So I'm doing it for my son, who may or may not need somebody to hold that space. And then I need to establish boundaries with my husband. I don't want him to put himself in a position that's uncomfortable or unsafe for him. And I want him to be my ally. I want him to say he's supporting me in it. He doesn't need to justify it and say, well, she's not cheating on me. She hasn't left the marriage, so she's fine. Like, actually support me in my choice and my identity and my being. And he's struggling with that because he's Catholic raised as well. And he wants to people please and make it comfortable for everybody. So these are the conversations we're having last night and this morning about, like, what's this going to look like, and how will I feel supported, and how will you feel safe? And no, I don't have to push every conversation to be like activism, but I'm not going to let things slide that are hurtful.
Right.
And so we're rehearsing it And so that's setting really clear boundaries, because if we wait until the moment, and I think you and I were talking prior to coming on, like if you wait until during sex to talk about the boundaries you have around sex, it's kind of late. Like you're in the middle of like, it's messy. So like talk about it before. These are the things I agree to, not agree to. Here are my boundaries. Just like this. Like I want to talk about it before we get to the party, so that it's clear, and it'll still be messy, I'm sure.
It can still be messy because the reality is, I mean, you're going to be having a difficult conversation perhaps with these people. I mean, because they may say absolutely nothing, right? It may be that that's their status quo, that they haven't said anything yet. And so they're just going to pretend it didn't exist.
Very likely.
And that will be how they deal with it, right? It doesn't
the hardest thing for me. Oh, what am I thinking? I would rather have an argument than not know. It'll be so hard for me just to sit there. Pass me, please. No. I don't know. That's going to be hard. Yeah. I'm prepared to be challenged.
Then you'll want to start the conversation, right? And
I will.
You'll just stir the pot a little bit. So, did you see my book?
Raise your hand. You read my book. Yeah. I mean, I could go wearing a rainbow shirt. I could go wearing a very, like, queer friendly outfit.
You could go with a gift of your book. And here I am just being an instigator and starting trouble.
I could, what do you say? Just hand out my books? Yeah.
Yeah. Just go with a gift bag.
I love it. Yes. Yes. I could. I want to. I mean, I want to make fun of it and shave my hair, get a tattoo, and I don't know. I want to do, but I'm not going to do that. I just think it's kind of funny how shameful it still is for some people. But I was there a couple years ago, so I get why we hold shame around it. It's just interesting now that I'm in the space where it's accepted and I'm in a community and there's support and lovely, generous people who just open arm welcoming. It's looking back interesting how long it took me to even say anything out loud. It's just funny to me that that I needed a pandemic where nobody's gonna I'm not gonna bump into anybody in the grocery store after putting this out on Facebook. So this is probably the best time to do it, because maybe by the time the world opens up, they'll forget that I came out. So I came out in February of this year. And I was really glad there weren't any PTA meetings that week. That was really helpful, So there's a benefit to it. I don't want to say it was a cop out, because I'm still really glad I did it, but it was easier. I didn't go on book tours. I had a very small book signing party a few times with friends, put it out on Facebook, but it wasn't like an auditorium of people criticizing my book. It wasn't, I could have put myself out there more and should soon. But I'm still nervous. I don't know if that's shame as much as it is ooh, okay, gotta armor up and figure out how to handle people's judgments.
Right. And their responses to it. And it can be hard. It can be challenging.
Yeah.
And I also wonder if you would have done it if you didn't already have humor as a tool, right? The fact that you put humor in your toolbox I think makes it easier to do this, because what we were just engaging in terms of your in-laws were some delicious thoughts, as my friend Michelle LaChapelle refers to them as delicious thoughts. You don't do them, but you can joke about them and you can laugh about them, right? So you can think about, I'll shave my head and I'll just get you could get a temporary throat tattoo. I mean, you could just really, right? But you're not going to actually do all of that, but it feels really good. It feels really delicious. And it's a way to laugh about it, to sort of ease the pain of feeling unaccepted, right? So would you have written the book if you hadn't learned to laugh?
The book title has been in me for about 10 years. My next husband will be a lesbian. I'm pretty sure. I've had
every time you were upset with your husband, that book title was what was in you.
Every time I was upset with him, every time I had sex, every time I watched a movie that was more interesting than my life. And I was like, And I would start following women in town. I would if there was a couple of clearly lovers, two women sitting at the restaurant, I'd be like, why is this so interesting and intriguing? And why do I envy that? It was like
Right.
interesting. So it's always been there. And the humor came. And then it was like, I mean, seriously, when you face like the loss of your own life or the loss of a child's life, there's nothing scarier. So I think it was more moving through the fear and being able to write the book than it was accessing humor, but it didn't hurt to have that too. But I feel like I'm actually more fierce in my like, life is really short and I've been wanting to do this, and like, why not now is, I think, more my motivation.
Right.
But there is humor in it, and there's humor in my stories in this, and there's humor in other women's stories. One of my favorites is it was called Spatula Story, and this woman, a friend of mine who did decide to leave her marriage to have a relationship with a woman, went to the store for the first time after divorcing, or after filing for divorce, because she had to buy all new kitchen utensils, and because now they needed 2 toasters and 2 spatulas. And she's like, I'm shopping for spatulas, but it was like this like symbolic, like you with the cooking. She's like, I'm gonna buy my own spatula. You know what I mean? And she was like, it felt sad, like bittersweet, liberating, and like just funny all at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of those stories in there.
That's awesome. I do want to, we've been going fast and furious, so we're almost out of time. I want to open it up. If anybody has any questions,
Are there people watching?
Post them. There are people watching, and they have been super quiet. They have been just watching and listening. So any questions, just post them below. And I know too that there are some women who can't be present with us,
Yes.
and they're going to watch later. So how do people get in touch with you?
Mm-hmm. So I have a website, pashamarlowe.com. And on that, you can find out all about me and my programs, including my one-on-one coaching or the Roar with Laughter therapeutic comedy program you mentioned, and the podcast, because I have a Let Pleasure Be the Measure podcast that I love to do. But if you want to email me, you could do pasha@pashamarlowe.com, or you could easily find me on Facebook and Instagram under my name, Pasha Marlowe. So I think I'm really easy to find and reach out to. I offer free, there's Calendly links in many of those places, because I offer a free coaching call, and where we just say, how is it possible to find pleasure and humor in what you're going through right now? And I just love these liberating calls, because it's maybe the first time people have been orientating towards that.
Right.
So, and it can be new trauma or trauma from long ago that people are working through. Right now, there's a lot of grief work going on from the last 2 years, not just mine, cumulatively, worldwide grief and loss.
Right. There's been a lot because of COVID. I mean, it really it changed the dynamic. And I think too, it's interesting to see what's happening with people with the world opening up again also, because there's a lot of anxiety, right? Some people are just wanting to jump into opening up, but others are jumping in with anxiety or holding back with anxiety. And now that you have the new Delta variant, right? Are we going to close back down again? So we're still living in this age of uncertainty.
Absolutely.
And some of us handle uncertainty better than others, right?
Yes. And I'm also, when I talk about grief and loss, people assume, well, I don't really need to do that because I haven't lost anybody, if you're fortunate enough to say that. But then it's like we lost jobs, we lost freedoms, we lost theater, we lost travel, we lost a lot, including probably people and animals throughout these couple of years. And so we can honor that grieving process as a loss of everything, from a loss of our innocence, a loss of our, there's so much layered in there. People who, I'm remarried, I still can grieve the loss of my first marriage, even if it sucked. I can still grieve the old future's gone, right?
Right.
So I just think it's good to hold space for it all, because we're so complex. And and if we can talk about it, we could take our power back, not so much.
And I think that's what you really do, is you keep talking about it. And so you show the power in talking about it, that we don't have to anymore as women. We don't have to just be quiet and take care of everybody else's needs. We get to say, I have needs too, and I get to talk about what's going on for me. And some people can meet those needs and some people can't. So I have two sisters. One sister's higher maintenance. Let's go with that. And the higher maintenance sister called me today. And instead of my tending to her needs, which, often, this morning I was just honest. I had stuff happening. I have physical challenges that I've talked about in this group earlier, and I had a flare again of it. And so I had pain in different parts of my body as a result of foods that I had eaten. And I chased her right off that phone. She could not get off the phone fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
So then I sent a text to my other sister and was like, wow, like, I'm going to use that more often.
Like, I'm going to have some digestive issues. If you want to talk to me, I'll be on the toilet. I'm not sure. Like, you could use these things. Yes. Some things work. I mean, the whole joke of like, oh, I have a headache. Like, we use that.
Right.
How's it work? Yeah. If I get really gassy at night, just, interesting timing, I can avoid some activities.
You can. So if you eat the right foods, then that takes care of it. And you don't have to say anything with your out loud voice.
Ice cream give me gas. Maybe we shouldn't have gone out for ice cream on that date, the first and only date in 2 years. Whoops.
Oh.
Sneaky, right?
Sneaky. That was very sneaky.
Thank you.
All right. I am going to let you go. We've been on for an hour. I want to thank you. It's been fabulous. Every time I talk to you, I learn so much.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you so much for having me. I love witnessing you and your work and being part of your group. I don't get on to comment as much, but I watch and I admire your work and your journey too. And you helped me quite a bit get to where I am in our conversations over the last year and a half. So thank you.
Well, thank you, because I love your group too. You have Midlife Mischief and Merriment, and it's a similar thing, right? We're sort of doing the Mutual Admiration Society, but I watch it, but I'm not commenting as much as I should. Yeah. I'm more tending to my group, just like you're more tending to yours. But
exactly. Yeah. Yes. I'm so glad to be here, and hopefully something in this message spoke to somebody out there at the perfect time.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
Thanks, Meredith. Bye.